there's another trade out there. Ari Mirov of the 33rd team, NFL Insider, big name on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it, said that if he had to take a shot, if he had to take a guess at the guy that will be traded or cut from the Steelers, the surprise that may not be so surprising, it's Dan Moore Jr., currently the starting left tackle for the Pittsburgh Steelers. We've talked about this a couple of times, but I think now that it's happened, now that Troy Fautanu is in the building, the Steelers feel really good about where their tackle is. I mean, is it time to move on from Dan Moore Jr. if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers, a guy that as of right now is the starter? But I find it really hard to believe that you're going to walk into 2024 after using back-to-back first-round picks and hunting for a Super Bowl and say Dan's going to start week 1. I just don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying, but by that same vein, it's hard for me to imagine them being comfortable with Troy starting week 1, too. I mean, I get it. He's a little bit more refined of a project or a prospect than Broderick was, but even Broderick had to wait a pretty long while. I mean, it wasn't until November that they were comfortable sliding him in as a starting left tackle full time, or starting right tackle, full time. So I'm hesitant to say that they would be really comfortable with throwing Troy out there to start right away, but I see what you're saying. I think if they do get to the point where they're comfortable with that, I'm fine with trading Dan Moore. Thing is, you just got to make sure you got to move quickly to find someone who can be a swing tackle, who can be a backup, because you're extremely thin without someone in that position, without a Dan Moore to even fill at least one spot as a backup. I get it. That's not ideal because he can only play really on one side of the line, but man, you need something to back you up. And I guess that's easier to do than to find a starter. It's easier to do that than to keep, two tackles that can only play one side of the line there. So that's my only concern is just don't wait until training camp to do this. Don't wait till training camp to certainly find a replacement for Dan Moore. If you're going to trade him, there has to be a backup plan somewhere. There has to be, because that's the other thing. I think you can't walk into training camp assuming that Troy is going to be ready to go from day one.
I agree.
So I that's what the only reason I'm hesitant to trade Dan Moore. But I think, in the grand scheme of things, it's not really going to end up mattering. Like, Troy's going to be your starter. Troy's going to be your starter when the season really gets going and it matters. And that's why I'm more in on a Dan Moore trade than I guess I was when I first heard it.
Yeah, so I agree. I think right now is a little bit jumping the gun. I think you gotta figure everything out before you just say, hey, okay, this is where, you know what I mean? You get ahead of the game, you fall for some impulses, and next thing you know, you're kind of struggling because you just don't have the pieces in place to replace him. And Dan Moore might not be a long-term starter in the NFL. He might not be a guy that's going to make much impact. He might be your worst offensive starter on the offensive line. That's a real possibility. But you don't know what you have in Troy yet. You got to figure that out. I think that Troy will come in here and impress and be the instant starter. I don't think there's much worry there or concern there for me, but you have to see it. You can't just guess. You have to see it. And on top of that, I think you have to see what you got in Spencer Anderson before you make a move for Dan Moore. Like, is Spencer ready to go? Is he ready to be your swing tackle? Is he ready to be the backup? Like, is he ready to be the reporting eligible tackle? If that's the case and you see that early, cool, make a move. There's no reason not to make a move. You have Dylan Cook as your fourth, and I think that they actually like Dylan Cook and what he could become because he's still relatively new to the position. But you have to see if your pieces are in place before you make a move. Because if this was a backup, it'd be different. If this was Dan and Chuk still around, I think that that's a totally different scenario. Get rid of one of them immediately because there's no point in having two. But right now, you are going to take a shot in the dark that Spencer Anderson's ready to go and be your primary backup. And if he's not, then you have to have somebody there. Even if Dan Moore is not a swing tackle, and that's what everybody wants to talk about. He's not a swing tackle. Yes, but Troy Fautanu and Broderick Jones could play both sides. And if you find yourself in a position where you need Dan Moore to step in as a starter, you can move the other one to the right tackle position if need be. That's not the end of the world for the Pittsburgh Steelers. It's not ideal for a swing tackle, which is why you'd rather Spencer Anderson work out. But it's still a possibility and maybe a better one if Spencer Anderson isn't ready to go.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense too. But I also think, I don't think it'll be hard to find a swing tackle somewhere else, either in the free agent market. There are a bunch of tackles that are still unsigned as we get into May and we get, approach the start of the summer. So I don't think it'd be difficult to find a swing tackle, to even find someone who maybe has some starting experience or something like that.
Yeah.
Um, I'm curious, what kind of value do you think they would get in a Dan Moore trade? Because
Uh,
I can't imagine it'd be very high. It'd be like, would it be? It, is he worth more than a Kevin Dotson or a Kendrick Green?
I mean, I think more than a Kendrick Green trade. I think they got a
Yeah,
sixth round for Kendrick. I think they got a fifth
yeah, it was
for
only
Kevin
fifth, or
Dotson.
yeah,
Yeah, I could see a fifth round for Dan Moore. I could see a fifth rounder, maybe a fourth. A conditional fourth, maybe like a conditional fifth. That if he plays and ends up starting, it turns into a fourth, something like that. His starting, I mean, he started every game he's ever played in the NFL, and he's been reliable. And I think that, no matter what, this guy is somebody that is going to make a roster. Like he's not gonna
yeah,
like phase out of the NFL. Like he's going to be here for a little while. He's a good, reliable backup. He's going to have to learn to play both sides. But if you could bring him in and try to make the most of him, I think it could work out. I could see a fifth round. I think the most you'd get for him is a fourth, depending on how urgent things are. That's my thing about trading him right now, is that I think that his value increases in training camp.
yeah,
I think that right now you have a bunch of teams who are optimistic about their team. Come training camp, you have a bunch of teams who are worried about their team. So if that's the case, make a trade during training camp, and you're probably going to get more than what you would get if you traded them right now, because you're just looking to get rid of them and everybody knows it.
yeah, absolutely. I think I was going to make that same point. Is that right now everyone is selling themselves on potential.
Yes.
Everyone's potential, everyone's ceiling is still in play right now. Once you get to training camp, once guys get hurt, once guys actually show what they're capable of on the field, not everyone's meeting their potential. That's just math. Like that's just
Mm-hmm.
how it works. So that's when you start to get, teams that are a little more desperate, teams that might say, hey, we need an upgrade here, we need a fail safe plan here. That's where his value might go up. Because I think that was true with Kevin Dotson, especially. And I think Kendrick Green, too, to a certain extent. Like, we were talking about a potential Kendrick Green trade, and we're like, man, I don't even know what you could get for him. Like,
No.
there's the market would be so thin. And then all of a sudden, a team has a few offensive linemen go down. They have a need, and the Steelers have a solution. And Kendrick Green moves on. He ends up getting an opportunity and making the most of it. And I think that was the same thing with Kevin Dotson. The team faced with a ton of injuries, they need whatever they can get, and the Steelers can reap the benefits of that.
Yeah, I agree. I think you're going to find it happens every year, with every single position. You could trade literally anybody during training camp and get more value than what you thought you were going to get for them, just because guys get injured all the time, and other teams are just like, we need somebody. Like, screw it. We need anybody. We'll take them. That's why Kenny Pickett's going for, or Justin Fields goes for nothing right now. But if you traded him during training camp to a team that needed a quarterback, that's a second round pick. Like you're going to get massive return for a Justin Fields later in the offseason, or anybody. We're talking, Mason Rudolph's been the hottest name for years on the quarterback trade market, and he's never gone anywhere. And I could imagine they probably would have got something crazy for him, for a team that needed a backup when Mason was available. And I think that might hold true with Najee too. Like you might find out that like Dallas isn't in on Zeke and all their other running backs stink, and they need somebody. Well, Najee Harris is here. Let's call and see if Najee's available. Boom. Let's make a trade. We'll see what happens. I think it holds true for everybody. The more urgent you are, the better.